1, 2, check. Okay. I need just a minute. I got lost, so I'm. There is Pete. Hello. I can broadcast and everything. I'm just. Okay. Thanks.
Did we get scribes yet?
No. Can you take care of that while I finish?
Get a Jabber scribe, please. Yes, we should have taken care of it ahead of time. Sam, you want a Jabber scribe? And Dan will Jabber scribe. Sam Weiler, Dan York. And someone want to just take top-level action item minutes. And please, your name, I'm sorry. Steve. Thank you. I knew that. Okay. Blue sheets. Let me get it back going around. The return to sender. Who hasn't signed yet? Okay, start doing this side. Who else? Down that. Good.
Wait for my Mac to take over.
Uh-huh. Do we even have chair slides?
Yeah, I did.
All right. Welcome to DBOUND. I hope that's why you're here. Excellent. So, please note well. Do we have the short version?
Yes, the short version. You have the right to remain silent.
Yeah, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used by the IETF. You have the right to consult with an attorney with respect to your intellectual property rights and obligations prior to participating in any IETF context. If you do not know what the IETF IPR rules are, find them out now. And you may not even want to sit in the room while you're doing that. Just go discover them. It's a wonderful journey. But please be aware that if you are here and contributing, that has implications for you if you have intellectual property in this area. Blue sheets went around, and let me, Sam Weiler, and Sam, would you type in the Jabber room that you and Dan York are Jabber scribing? Very good, and Steve is taking top-level minutes for us. All right.
So for those who have not been participating on the list so far, we have 2 documents that are not working group items yet, but they are essentially problem statements and trying to work out exactly what we're doing here. These are worth consulting if you haven't seen them already. So we're going to spend a lot of time today confirming that we have a good understanding of the problem we're trying to solve here, and then trying to confirm that we can do these in either one omnibus solution or whether there needs to be separate solutions for separate use cases. We thought we had this nailed down before, but it seems like there's still some conversation that needs to happen about it. So this whole hour pretty much is going to be dedicated to that.
And as chairs, one of the things we noticed is these two are orthogonal questions, right? That there's this whole set of what do we need to represent, and then do we need multiple mechanisms? And the answer to those questions can be answered independently. So that's what we're looking to find out at the end of the day today.
So one of the ones that keeps recurring is this distinction we have between what the list has been talking about as public names versus private names, and exactly where the line between those two things is. Or is there a line? Right. And okay, fair enough as well. This should be the comment from the floor was should we even be using those terms? And the 5 use cases that I think we've all accepted are the ones that we're interested in are now on the list or on the screens. Cookies, certs, wildcard certs, email policy records, and equivalences. Basically, if I can apply short labels to all of those. You to the mic, please.
Or pass down a mic if
it's
easier.
There's also the pink box matter.
Thanks. I'll avoid the pink box.
Right.
There's
Kurt,
another one which is Kurt Anderson. There's another one which is whose neck should I throttle if I'm seeing problems from this domain or I need to contact someone from this domain, and where do I look for that information? So that in some ways is looking for an abuse record or looking for an authoritative who is, and it can be related in some ways to this kind of question space as well.
That's kind of a new one on me, and that's something.
It's
something
floated around in some of the conversations,
okay.
So I just raised it as it didn't get onto the list of questions.
And go ahead, Andrew.
This is Andrew Sullivan. I really think that's a completely different problem from this. I think it's an important problem, and I wish that Weirds had solved it by putting its bootstrap records into the DNS the way sane people would have done it, as opposed to putting it in an IANA registry. But we're not going to fight that here. So my view is that we could have solved that. But the key thing about this particular case is that what you're trying to do is find administrative boundaries within the DNS itself, and what you're looking for is additional data outside of it. And so I want to draw a distinction between those and not conflate them.
Before we get too far down this, what the chairs would like to finish today with, if at all possible, please, is a new set of milestones that this working group will attempt to achieve to show that we're making progress towards something rather than spinning our wheels on definitions.
Dave Crocker, could you go back to the bullets?
That one?
So the first 3 bullets are different in an interesting way from the 4th bullet. The 4th bullet is really just about a DNS mechanism for going to a place. And the first 3 involve a lot more than that, which I will call semantic detail after you figure out where to go look for some information. And they're useful because they're very concrete. They have known applications. We don't actually want to answer those first 3 questions in their entirety. We want to answer enough of the mechanism questions to then allow the next layer up to make the kind of decisions that are in there. This is about finding information rather than actually deciding whether to accept a cookie, for example. And those first 3 bullets are interesting enough that we could easily and probably would get very bogged down if we don't remain very clear about this difference between the mechanism we're trying to create versus the use of the mechanism.
Okay, so I think Andrew has slides prepared for driving the discussion today. And
well, they only had these things on them, so we could just go through it.
Well, yours delivered prettier colors.
Yeah.
All right.
I went to all the trouble.
Oh, well, in that case.
Is that not better than black and white? Come on.
Very
Do you want me in the pink box? So now I can't see them, right? So I have to pull this out anyway so I can turn around and look at them because I can't remember what they all are. All right. Sorry about the logo, but the corporate people have decided that I have to have a logo, but not on all the slides, fortunately. Next, please. See, no logo. So the thing that I figured we could do is just kind of go through these questions. I agree with the distinction that Dave just made, and I think he's got right, you know, what we're trying to do. I think that there were a number of dimensions. Casey suggested most of them, and I think they're pretty useful. So I thought we could just kind of walk through them and see whether we can come to some sort of agreement on each one, and then we would get maybe some milestones or something out of that. I don't know. Try next.
Sure.
Next, please. Yeah, okay. So this is the cookie question. And the idea here is you've got, right, because you're making a decision about the cookie on the basis of the name. That's really what the issue is here, right? We've got this name. You're going to make a decision on the basis of the name, its data, and you're gonna adopt some sort of policy about that. So the first thing that I want to know is whether this is a question we have to answer in order to solve whatever problems we think we have. So how many people think we have to answer this question? Not should I accept this particular cookie, but like are we able to answer a question, or do we have to be able to answer a question about whether we can accept a cookie given the name that we've got in front of us? Do people think that this is a question for us or not?
This is in our problem space?
Yeah, is this our problem or not?
Wave your hands about if this is in our problem space. And it's not in our problem space? Wave your hands about? Good.
Okay, no, wait, third one, don't know.
Which means the remainder is sleeping, reading email.
Okay, that's fine, but so then the next thing, is this the right question? And I think Dave argued a moment ago that this is not quite the right question, but it's close enough for the purposes of this discussion. Is that fair, Dave?
Hand him a mic.
I think these kinds of questions are useful because we see the relevance of them, but we only want to answer part of the question, which is the mechanism that we need to then allow the next layer up to do the semantic work.
And for those who might be out in medical land, yeah, lots of nodding on that. We are agreed this is about mechanism to toss up the stream.
So clearly then we gotta whittle this question down a little bit, but the key point here is, do I have enough information about this name? Well, yeah, let me try that. Do I have enough information about this name to make a decision about this cookie? Is that close? Well, this is the particular cookie one.
We're going to do them we're going to do each of the issues one at a time to see if we're all in agreement on all of the different domains that we're dealing with. That was the wrong word. Different areas that we're dealing with. Yes.
Hi, Jeff Hodges. Maybe a way to think about it is, am I able to get enough information? Well, is one enabled to get does the information gleaned enable one to make a decision about, in this case, accepting a cookie? That's, I think, the word enable in there some way.
Another clarifying question. This is less about me accepting the cookie, but more about the domain Y being allowed to set a cookie for domain X to me.
Right. So those are equivalent, right? Because the policy is actually enforced by you. That is, you make the decision when the cookie comes in. You make the decision. Oh yes, I'll accept this one given this name, like given this context.
Remember to give your name at the mic, by the way.
So it's close to the right question, but it's not quite. So that now the question, like, what would success be for this? Oh no, Casey's getting up.
One other thing I think.
Casey,
Sorry, Casey.
Thank you.
DCO. I think one other thing to consider is not only what are we trying to do, but also what is the current mechanism in place for doing this would help give us some context. So for right now, you might say that it's a combination of looking at the relationship between the two in terms of the DNS is one an ancestor of the other, and then also right now is one, is the domain that's trying to set the cookie in a public suffix realm, right?
Right. So
I'm just saying for context to know what we're dealing with versus what we're trying to do more generally speaking, correct?
Okay. So yes, I mean I think that we only ever started this effort because we accepted that there was something broken about about all of these cases, which is really what I'm trying to say is with that, is this a question we must answer?
Sure.
That is, there might be some things in here that we think, well, that's not really broken. It's sort of a nice to have, and so we might not include it on our like list of stuff we have to do. But what you're saying is, I think, if I understood you correctly, what you're saying is additionally, how is this solved now? And do you also want to say how is it bad?
Sure. I think that's kind of a natural extension, but I think that helps us answer the must answer versus nice if people just compare how it's currently being done, because that could be said for the other things as well. But
right.
I mean, and maybe that's as simple as what I already said, but just at least to put it out there so that we're working from that base.
Yeah. Okay, that works for me. So partly also it's going to come into this compatibility question here, right? Because we've got this other idea now. What would success look like if we could answer this question? And so then the first one was portability, and as I said, Casey came up with most of these dimensions, so he might have more to say about these. This first question is portability, and I think what that means is, will this work in a lot of different contexts? Maybe you should just go to the mic and we can tag team this or something. Or you can get another mic. You can stand here in the box.
There's not enough room for both of us in the box. This is Casey again. I will kind of stand here or near here, but if someone else needs to get up, that's okay. So part of my question about portability also was the online-offline question. I think.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So can you take it with you whether you're plugged in or not? I mean, that's pretty much in essence. Or, again, to make a comparison with what's currently out there, is it something that can be, completely self-contained or partially self-contained? Then I guess it's not completely. But you know what I'm going for. Is it, as simple as a file that gives you most of what you need, or is it an online lookup? That's part of portability.
So
what I envisioned.
A question from the chair, so I get my head around the issue. Is this simply cacheability, or is there more to it than that? Because local cacheability means I can carry it around with me, which may mean that the first answer is online, but other answers may or may not be. And then there's, do I need a collection of these in some form? And then we're getting into the format of it rather than the nature of it. So is there a distinction there?
So I don't know that I have the complete answer to that. What I would say is that what you have said is maybe a way to address portability, to enable portability in one way or another. I mentioned only one example of, if you had a file to simply download, and I'm going to use this example for those that, the PSL, right? Yeah, that's fine. But I mean, the PSL right now is a file that you can download. Cacheability for something that would be online is another example of that, how you might do that. But anyway, that was part of what I envisioned with portability. Does this need to be, online? Does it need to be offline? Can it be a combination of both? Can you achieve it through caching? That kind of question to answer.
So actually, what's cool about this is that the portability and scalability things go together, right? Because so in this dimension, in the can you pick it up and take it with you, the PSL, the existing public suffix list thing from publicsuffix.org, that has the portability feature that you can get the whole file and you get it one time and you've got like the current version, right? It has the scalability disadvantage that it can't know about all kinds of stuff all over the internet at random levels of the tree because it won't scale, right? Because there's a guy who's updating a list. And so, we already solved that problem in the past. That's why we invented the DNS in the first place. So you can't have another list on the side that's maintained by a guy. So that's an example of maybe a set of trade-offs that we want to consider in this success discussion, right? How much of portability, and sort of self-containedness is valuable as compared to being able to do it as a sort of general purpose solution for a lot of different contexts. And I don't know what the answer is to that, but it's maybe one of the things we want to consider.
This is a tight room. Yeah, but it is a tight room, so people who are near a removable mic, keep an eye out for a hand going up and pass the mic down.
Christian with Microsoft. One of the characteristics there, beside portability and scalability, is what happens when I don't know? I mean, how is it fail-safe? For example, I can invent another 10,000 top-level domains that have 20 different thousand policies. How do I fail? Do I fail by allowing when I should not, or do I fail by refusing when I could have?
So I agree with that, and I think that that's another dimension of somebody's computer went to sleep.
Yeah.
Caffeine. No, really, it's in the App Store. It's an excellent app.
Oh.
It solves exactly that problem and nothing else. It's fantastic. It does one thing and well. So few things left, right? Even the DNS.
Right. A third of our time is gone. So
the
These are great dimensions for discussion on the list, but I don't think that we're going to come to any consensus here now on any of these questions about these. That's what the list is for. Let's hit the points and agree if we think we're asking the right questions. Then we can dive into the answers on the list.
So I fully agree with that. I wanted to go over these terms, though, in this first slide because I wanted to make sure that everybody is in agreement on what they mean. Because at the very beginning, for instance, portability turned out to be something that Casey and I understood differently. And I've noticed a distinct lack of discussion of these things on the list. So that's part of why I want to goose this here, right, and make sure that we get there.
And I just
a suggestion then is a glossary on the wiki to work on the terms.
I think that's perfectly reasonable. And I think what we want to get out of this discussion is, you know, if we don't have a sharp answer for each of these questions right now for any one of these topics, immediately boot it to the list. But if we have an obvious, everybody's head is nodding up and down that this is specifically the mechanism we need for question 4 in this bunch, that would be good to know now, and then we can start sorting the rest on the list.
Thank you for volunteering, Kurt, for the wiki.
So I think that the compatibility thing is literally how are people coping with this to the extent they are now, and are we going to be able to are people going to be able to use this mechanism somehow as a drop-in with their existing code? Is that what you meant too, Casey?
I think that sounds about right.
Okay. And then complexity, I think the dimension there is essentially how hard is it going to be to build and also to operate whatever it is that we come up with. So it's not just the building, but the operation, right? There's something appealing about the public suffix list in that it's dead simple to understand, but it turns out to be really complex to get it out properly because, for instance, you've got to update every client every time you want to do it. So that turns out to have an operational complexity that's a little painful. And so I think those are two dimensions that we want to keep in mind. Does that seem fair?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so next. So this is the user interface question. This is the one, right, where in your browser magic entry box at the top, if you've got a domain name in there, however they decided that you've got a domain name, then the last part of it, which is sometimes called the real domain name or other terms of art that I don't understand, are highlighted. So is this a question that we must answer?
Do we have any browser folks in the room? Pass him a mic for a second. I'm going to. So, if there were browser folks in the room who said we need this mechanism too,
Dave Crocker, it's not that this isn't a really, really important question. This is really, really the wrong group to address it.
Well, that's why I asked. Are there browser folks in the room? If they wanted to contribute to this and say we're willing to latch on to the same mechanism you guys are using for the rest, and we'll make sure that it works for our use case, that's fine. If there's no one in this room who is a browser person.
So that what I would take that as, we need to be able to feed the information that the guys who do this need. That's a different question than this.
Okay, so it's not the right question, but however Dave just reformulated it, do we need to be able to do that?
Yes.
Yes. The question is maybe...
Your name, please?
Oh, sorry, Stefan Bortsmeyer, AFNIC. The question may be strange, but the point is, do some people have a need to display the relevant domain names? And then, should we give them the means to have this?
Very nice.
And then the answer is yes. It was more or less the same thing for the previous question, because there is no need to specify what could be done with cookies, because we already have a RFC for that.
Wes Vertiker, so the restating it even more clearly, I think, is, does the application layer need to know where the separation is between the two different parts of the name? And does that information need to be passed, to the application layer so that it's retrievable by them, right? Because we don't do UI, but right. We understand the need that they might need to do something with different parts.
So,
Ted Hardy, I'd like to suggest that this is a much more narrowly scoped question than that, and that one of the things many applications want to do is service discovery. And service discovery sometimes has this tree walking urge for which DBound might provide answers, and you might therefore get a different answer to do some applications in the course of certain processes want this, but I would really like to have use cases that are scoped more narrowly than some application might have some context. And I liked this one, even though I also thought the answer was no, because I thought it was well scoped. And so I think it would be great if we do see particular applications that we introduce them as new use cases rather than broadening this.
David Lawrence, I was just going to emphasize Wes's point that the IETF is traditionally very bad at UI issues, but we're better at semantic issues. And here we're defining the semantic that a UI might find relevant for presentation. And so I think that's important.
Okay, so what I heard in this, just to move on as suggested before, what I'm hearing here is that there's disagreement about whether this semantics needs to be exposed in a way that is particularly relevant to this. There seems to be widespread agreement that the semantics more generally is something that we better be able to solve.
I see nodding.
All right, so it's definitely the wrong question, and then we can deal with those. I think that the success questions here are the same as they were for the last item, right? So we can discuss those on the list. Well, there's a later one where I'm not actually convinced that. Okay. I think the complexity, for instance, for the DMARC stuff is quite a bit different. Okay. Next, please. So this is the, and notice that this is an arbitrary domain, two arbitrary domains, and whether they're under the same administrative control. So this is different from the separation question in that there's an implication of control here. I don't know if it turns out that we think that that's an important distinction or not, but that's the reason that this control word is in there.
Can I ask you a clarifying question?
Yes.
Ted Hardy. It sounded like you were using this almost as if domain X and domain Y might be arbitrary, like example.com and example.net. Is that what you meant, or did you mean they were in a single, they might appear together in a single label?
Isn't it funny
sorry, series of labels.
Isn't it funny that you should ask me that? So the I'm glad you picked up on that, because this is part of the right question that's on here. There are two possible ways that we could go there, right? One is we're going to absolutely limit this strictly to ancestor-descendant relationships, and we're never going to go across the tree. But there are other people who think that cross-tree relationships are also important, because it turns out that when, say, large database corp buys large X computer manufacturer corp, and they merge things, there's temptation to set cookies across those things and so on. And some people have felt that that would also be a valuable feature. And so these are two things, and one of those has no backward compatibility story at all, because it doesn't work at all today. Unless you just turn everything on.
Ted Hardy again. Would it be fair to restate that slightly more narrowly to say, could domain X in some theory be denamed to domain Y? I'm getting no as my answer there, but in
Could
a
we
series of
not
very sad
drag DNAME
groans.
into this? I mean, we've already got 6 messes on the floor.
Yes, and Peter reminds me that DNAME does not apply to the node itself, thus
Right.
further complicating this question. Before I leave the microphone, I'll express a preference to stick to ancestor descendant for round 1.
Peter Koch, at the risk of duplicating previous comment, and I was late and maybe missed the part where you said, is domain a node or a subtree?
That's a good question. Okay, so we've got.
If you say domain name, I'd say it's the node only,
itself.
but this is ambiguous.
So that seems actually to me to be another topic that we need to add to our use case problem. That is, we need to nail down. I recognize that actually, because I had a proposal originally, and its proposal was had inheritance tricks because of wildcards, but apart from that, actually, it failed closed. So my natural tendency is to say, well, it's the name because that's what a domain name is. But I recognize that there are other people who don't believe that. And who believe, in fact, that subtree relationships, in particular further down the tree, are fundamental. And so actually, we really do need to sort that one out. I'm not proposing we try to sort it out here at the microphone. I think that's, again, a list thing. But
okay, so another question, if I may.
I hope somebody's taking really good notes, because this is fantastic.
It's all surveyed here. You're safe. Did you define control? Is that like policy setting for something, or are we only talking about web browsers and cookies and everything?
Administrative control.
It's administrative control over the domain name, whatever that means.
Oh.
So it's but what it is
whatever
it's
that
different
means.
From it. What it is different from the zone administrator. So right there, this is not the SOA is the key thing. So it's some and in one of the drafts we had this idea of. It changed names several times, so I forget what we called it last time. It was policy realm, I think, is what we settled on. So the idea is that, like, whoever it is, right? If it's, well, my employer is Dyn, so if it's Dyn.com and I've also got Dynec.net, those two things are somehow in the same policy realm because I say so. They're under my control. I don't know what under my control means, but I know that it's an opaque thing that says these things go together.
But at a certain domain name, you offer different services, and they might be controlled by different policies.
Yeah, and in that case, you need to have a mechanism by which you can say these things actually don't go together. That's the use case. Like, one of the use case examples that we've had a lot of the time is stuff like Blogger.com, right? You don't want Blogger.com to be able to set stuff in all of these, or rather,
No, I'm just talking about the nodes, not the subtrees. Let's make it complicated.
Well, hang on. You don't want Blogger.com to set a thing such that Bob.blogger.com can set things for Charlie.blogger.com, because they're really different people.
You're back in cookie space already.
Well, or whatever, any other kind of thing here. Are these under the same thing? SSL certs, whatever you like.
To cut this short. Define control. I think that's an ambiguous term here, and I'm not making this up. We've had this at various occasions where it's for a certain set of policies or services, the control is identical. That the controlling body, entity, whatever is identical. For other services, it's disjunct. So please define
what you're
control,
actually arguing is that the name is not sufficiently specific for this case.
Unless you talk about a specific service, and one specially specific service might be the control of the provisioning part in the DNS. But I thought we were talking about applications.
The
and not
provisioning
so much...
part in the DNS is out of scope for this.
Okay,
thing.
fine.
That's the domain name administrator. That's whoever's the SOA person.
Okay, fine. So then we are not talking about the special part, but only about the special part.
That's
they have
right.
Different services. Okay. Still, I think it's ambiguous, but message received.
Okay.
I
don't know who's next.
Adam Roach. That's why I've been bouncing up and down, because that issue I think is a really thorny one. The example you gave if you think about, for example, who's going to issue the SSL cert for x.blog.com versus y.blog.com, it's probably blog.com. But you're right about the cookies. So, I mean, when you talk about control, it's control of what? Because the answer to that is going to be, I mean, the answer to this question is going to be different depending upon what aspect of control you're talking about.
So we need to add a question which is not on these slides anywhere. So somebody who's taking notes has to like write this one down.
Keep looking at Steve.
We need to add a question about whether this needs to be scoped to the service or scoped to the domain name. In some of the previous drafts, this has actually bounced back and forth because people said on the one hand, well, wait a minute, it's different services at the same name. And other people said, yeah, but everything else we do in the DNS, we do only at the name level, and below that you don't. To which I said, yeah, SRVs, but I didn't get anywhere with that. So
I think the example being the PSL doesn't have a sense of service. It's
yeah.
always either part of the suffix or not. And it's based completely on the name. There's no independent, well, it's public if it's this service, but not public if it's that service, right?
So we need to add to this list of stuff whether we're scoping at names or services.
Could you repeat that last sentence?
Okay, so the PSL says this is the public suffix or it's not. It's not that this is the public suffix if it's for service A, but it's not the public suffix if it's service B.
Well, yeah, but that's because it's solving a very different problem. It doesn't talk about control.
The reason we're asking these questions is to find out whether we are using the same mechanism for all of these different problems, or we're going to need different mechanisms for the different problems. So if what we're hearing is correct, that for this kind of problem, we need something that also includes service, then it may be solved by a different mechanism than what the PSL is solving.
I think the point is when you point up there and say this kind of problem, you're talking about a suite. And
That's
an
right.
almost intractably large suite of problems.
And that I think is is this the right question? The answer is no, because it's a suite of questions. It's not a single question. And that we've heard that answer now.
And one other thing, I mean, just to be clear, as far as I'm concerned, and I've talked a little bit about the public suffix list on the list, but part of the reason is the public suffix list simply, as you said, delineates public or not public, right? And so it's been used for other things, but that's beyond its scope. That's just what it is, and that's why we're here, right? But that's part of the reason is because that's all it can do.
Ray Bellis, ISC. Harking back to Ted Hardy's comments, I think it's very important that we decide whether the cross-domain, example.com versus example.net stuff, is really in our problem space very much sooner than later, because I think the solution space that we adopt will depend on whether we need that or not. So I can imagine, for example, DNS-based solutions, which would be applicable if we're only tackling the sort of like sibling/cousin type approach, where a parent domain can make assertions about its subdomains. But I think that might be very much harder if we're having to actually completely cross the domain space.
So can I ask a sense of the room question? Hum if you think we need to address the cross-domain space. And hum if you think it would be bad if we did the cross-domain space.
Can we hum for both?
You can. Hum as you see fit. You'd rather hear the inverse. I got it. Okay, I know the answer to that question.
So hold on.
Let's not.
Yeah.
But I think the answer to the first hum was surprising enough to me that there were enough people who said, yeah, we need to address that. That I want to hear that on the list. I don't think I need to go further in the room. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that.
Name, please.
Sorry, this is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore. This is a complicated problem, and there are clearly scenarios in the real world where this is important and useful, and I think it would be a mistake to block solving the problem that is the strictly hierarchical zone control, public, private, under different mechanisms question by trying to solve this as well. So if DBound wants to tackle two separate issues, one of which is how do we do different type of service differentiation based strictly on hierarchical relationships, and also chooses to look at this, maybe via a totally separate mechanism, that's fine, but I would not want to see the mechanism for the clean zone cuts. I mean, they're not zone cuts because they're not SOAs, but the hierarchical zone cuts block on something as complicated as arbitrary aliasing per name per service.
Yeah, plus lots.
The chairs hear you.
And David Lawrence, I just wanted to say also that when the question was address, that's not solve. And so I think it is important that the issues be recognized and addressed without necessarily having to solve them.
Fair enough.
So what I'm hearing, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, one follow-up comment, and I think this is follow-up to what Ted mentioned earlier, and in the spirit of what DKG just mentioned. But I think it would be worth hearing in a follow-up, if the chairs so think, to find out what people think about, because we heard strong agreement that people want to solve that problem, but about the solving them in two different steps along the way, or if that's something you want to hear.
Also, can we assume that everybody who hummed is willing to work on those problems?
Can I just add one more clarification, which is the reason why I want to solve the other one first? The reason I want to solve the one based on the hierarchy first is because I think the DNS already represents points of hierarchical control where people are vulnerable to their parent zone. And it is important that we explicitly denote where those points of hierarchical control are so we can understand the power dynamics on the network. This is a separate issue that's maybe convenient and will be useful in many contexts, but I think the power dynamics are more important to solve first. And I don't want to not solve them because we get stuck on this.
I think we're hearing that this is going to need significant additional discussion, but we don't want them to be locked.
So I think that there are two quite separate issues here that we want to bring out of this, right? One is we need to determine whether what we're doing is a name-based thing or a name plus service-based thing for these kinds of problems, whatever control means. And so acknowledging Peter's question about what control means. And then secondly, we want to ask whether the hierarchical stuff or the or arbitrary names, and whether they're, and then maybe we want to understand what the relationship is between those two things, so that if it turns out that it's trivially easy to add the cross-domain stuff, I don't think it would be, but like if it turned out to be, then we'd obviously want to hit that off at the same time. Okay. Versus ruling it out. There are some people who said no, rule this out because all of my code already depends on the hierarchy, and it would be stupid to change all my code because we're at the IETF, right? That's what people say all the time.
So we have 15 minutes remaining. We should move on to this other slide? Or?
Well, these are the really big hot three ones. Okay. Except I want to get to the DMARC one. So if we can close the mic after this.
These two, okay.
Yeah.
Alex Mayhofer. First, I think that we should stick to the hierarchy model, and there are two reasons for that. First, I think the problem is well understood, and the second one is that the number of relations between object A and object B is limited to the number of domain names you have in a certain point in the hierarchy, while the number of relations in the cross-domain case, and the number of relations in the cross-domain case is at least the square of the number of available domain names on this planet, which is a significantly different number of relations. And I think we shouldn't limit us in that working group from having to declare failure if we can't address the cross-domain problem. So I would propose that we try to work on it. But if you find out along the way that it actually blocks the solution for the other problems that we have in that working group, that we agree on dropping that problem. Yeah? Small steps.
Hey, it's Wolfgang Riedel. I'm just wondering if this problem is not already solved. If I would go a slide back and would replace the cookie by mail server. So I think if you think about SMTP and SPF and all this stuff, it's like, would I trust an email coming from this mail server, which is belonging to a different domain and serving a different domain? And I think this is more or less the same thing here. So I would like to understand where's the difference between what we're already doing for SMTP versus what we are now doing for HTTP cookies, whatever. So,
well, we're going to get to the Dane case in just a moment, but I assure you that the Dane case is not actually. I'm sorry, DMARC.
There's a Dane case.
Yeah. Lord knows. Sorry, I've got Dane on the brain. We're going to get to the DMARC case in a moment, but I'm reliably told that that DMARC is not the panacea to all problems that some people seem to think. It has a use case and it works well for that use case, but it doesn't solve all problems. And I think the same problem is true here. So I think we want to understand this thing. And anyway, right? This isn't because we seem to think that there's more than just mail services here. So.
Yeah. Slide.
Maybe last thing, Andrew, Casey DC at the mic. You mentioned, or several have mentioned breaking it down, and so we got it broken down into ancestral relationships problem and then cross-domain problem, and then you had mentioned services and names, and I wonder if that's even a second step, ancestral kind of being the primary one, services and names being the next one, and then the other one. Now, I'm suggesting that I don't know that that's how other people feel, but that's another way, perhaps, of doing that baby step, if you will.
I think we've certainly got to work out the relationship between those as well. I think that probably is work that we got to do on the list. We are going to take this all to the list this time, right? Because that's what we said last time. So, yes. Next, please. Yeah. Okay. So this is the DMARC case, and I confess that I still don't exactly understand how the DMARC case works. What I believe happens is that what you're supposed to find is the deepest name in the hierarchy that has a controlling record over that, and then it automatically applies to everything underneath it. Is that true? No.
Okay, go ahead, Kurt.
Kurt Anderson. You start with the piece of mail that you receive. You start with the domain that is in that mail. Right. If that domain has a record, you use that record. Otherwise, you go to the top of the organizational domain in DMARC parlance, and you say, what's the record?
Is that one up? That's it.
It can be an arbitrary number up. So if you're getting something from a.b.c.example.com, example.com is your organizational domain.
Well, maybe. That I think is the problem, right?
At the moment, based on the mechanisms that we have available, that's what you do.
Right.
It would be nice if there was a way to say the organizational domain for a.b.c.example.com is c.example.com, but there's no mechanism to do that right now.
And the way you determine this, you use the PSL to determine where that cut is,
Correct.
And you query right below that, and you're done.
Yep, it's based on the PSL.
Yes.
But that's because that's the only mechanism that's available right now.
Right. Okay. So there have been two different things. So you're right. I skipped the first part, which is first you look at the name itself. But once you're past the first you look at the name itself, the current implementation is basically the deepest the deepest name in the tree is the organizational domain name.
The most shallow.
No, the most shallow. The most shallow. Closest to the root.
Closest to the root. Okay, well we're using them the opposite way, but that's what I meant. Yes.
Closest to
the one that is closest to the
shortest
root.
name. Shortest name.
Right.
How's that?
So
because com is a PSL,
right,
and AmazonAWS.com is also in the PSL.
And
so
one level below that is where you look for an organization.
Right. So that's not the most shallow one, because the most shallow one.
Private domain.
So
it's the most shallow private according to the PSL private public.
I
definition.
Really like this.
You're not looking for. It's just like the certificates or the cookies. You're not looking for com to give you the cookies.
Stop. We have only 9 minutes left here.
So Dave Crocker, the DMARC use is what Kurt is describing. The fact that the PSL is a little more elaborate than that is what we're stuck with, but it isn't the goal of what DMARC is trying to do.
In fact, DMARC says
is very simple, either here or the organizational domain.
And the DMARC draft actually says don't use this once there's something better. So
and so what we're trying, what we really want to get then is not. So this is the wrong question. What we really want is what is the organizational domain given this name?
Yes.
That's the question we want to answer.
Well, and which is, yes, this is an approximation because if you have the organizational domain, then you can look at the _DMARC, basically service-ish record at the organizational level.
Right. But I mean, the thing is, it occurs to me
it's
that
basically a service discovery type mechanism. So it could apply to service discovery, which was discussed earlier.
Yep. Right. Okay. So let's get the new question, and then we should answer that. And then I think there is an important compatibility and complexity pair that I wanna get to here, because the current DMARC documents say don't use this when there's something better, but if we change the way that the organizational name is calculated, that could potentially change like the meaning of this, right? Because you wouldn't have a mechanism to put like c.b.example.com in there right now, because c.b.example.com doesn't appear in the public suffix list. And so you could move people's organizational names if we did this. Is that okay?
And that's expected.
Okay.
Excellent. And so then there's another issue here having to do with complexity.
One other thing, KCDCO. One other thing that I think has to do with this that I didn't explicitly write out, because you could put it in there. I guess you could categorize it under complexity or even compatibility, and that is sane default.
Right.
Okay. And I bring that up because if among the solutions that are developed, you are able to say, okay, let's say we implement this, start out with 0 implementation, and it still works, and then we implement 1 and it continues to work because it's using current mechanisms and only using the new ones if it's detected that they're in place. That's the kind of thing that might answer part of the complexity question, and the compatibility question is the sane default question. And part of that you also might answer is, for example, Kurt raised the question, b.c.example.com. Well, how often does that happen? How often is the sane default in the current deployment actually reasonable? So anyway, those are among the questions we would ask that go along with that.
So with 5 minutes left, how do you want to wrap up your questions?
Well, I think what we need to do now, I think what this has done is exposed a number of, because I think the last one in here is like sort of a nice to have, but it's not that important, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, these are the certificate ones. No, we really need to cope with the certificates.
You want to use your 5 minutes?
Okay, so let's use the 5 minutes for the certificates. And the follow-on from here is we need to take these things now and really pound on them on the list, because we just completely failed. Like the list since Dallas has been a discussion among maybe 4 of us, and I was like, wrapped in IANA for a month and a half of that. So I know that I wasn't participating, but like I'm not that smart. So other people need to work on this, because like you're going to get a bad design if you let me do it. So please, like, let's take these things, and I think we've got a good list of things. All right, so let's take the rest of the 4 minutes we got left, and try to work out these certificate things.
I guess he left the room.
I've been told.
Go ahead.
So certificates, the reason that the certificate problem is a little bit different, right, is because the certificate authority is not in the middle of any of these things. Instead, they're busy trying to figure out whether they can make statements about a name. And so that's the reason that I thought this needed to be treated differently. Do people think that this is any different from the organizational name, for instance? Maybe nobody does, in which case we're done. Are there any CA people in the room?
Ted Hardy. So I think there's a related question here to the other questions, but I point out that this is a little bit tricky because in certificates, in addition to having the name, you have subject alt names, which themselves may have wildcards. So you can have a condition where you have star.example.com in the name and a subject alt name of mumble.net, star.mumble.net, and you have a question here of which domain name or domain names or which trees or in which parts of this are at issue. But if you kind of boil it down to, for a single name in a single slot of a certificate using a wildcard, can I infer from this record that this is a valid place to do that wildcarding? You might be able to do that, but I would actually challenge you to tackle a slightly more interesting question that ACME has, which is, if somebody is asking for a wildcard record of this type, how can I be sure that the proof of possession that they're using for that is actually under that wildcard? And that's a related but more tricksy question.
Yeah. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So it sounds like what you're saying, though, is that this question is not the right one and that we need to answer the other one.
Ted Hardy again. No. I think if you shrank this down to say, if I'm looking at a single one of these wildcard entries, like a single wildcard in the subject alt name, and you're talking about the given this request before me, I think what you're in essence saying is somebody's demonstrating something about their relationship to this domain in a request. The common way of doing that is to say, I owned foo.example, and thus everything under foo.example belongs to me. I have the right to delegate against it. Now, in fact, in a wildcard certificate, it's a single level of hierarchy, and I have to have star.foo.example if I want to have the foo.example subtree also represented in a single certificate, and I do that with the subject alt name. But the real question, I think, comes down to how are you going to structure the request before you in a way that's sensible for answering your first question, not how does DBound answer the question given the request. So it's this question, but scoped slightly differently and perhaps reversed.
We've got about a minute and a half.
Peter Koch, one observation, I'm not sure it's helpful, but you may judge. You know that the semantics of the DNS wildcard is different from the semantics of wildcard there, not only in the way that Ted just mentioned, but also by the ability to punch holes into the wildcard expansion. So depending on the solution, that might actually be a question that can only be answered after the proposal solution is on the table.
Okay. All right. Well, I believe we are out of time. So thank you very much for this. This was lovely and vigorous, but I do encourage us all to go to the list and nail these things down. I'd like to get out of this, right, some serious milestones in the next month and a half.
Before you walk out the door, if you have not signed the blue sheet, please do. This was a tight room, and we'd like to keep track of the numbers. Blue sheets are up here. And yes, please do make sure to keep an eye on the list. We will post notes. Please do follow up. And if you are willing to write pieces of this so that Andrew and Casey don't have to do all the work, that would be helpful. Thank you all.
We'll get a bigger room and more time. Weed.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that one.
Thank you. I may avoid Dane. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Are you here next? Okay. Oh, yeah, next working group. Yes. What's here?
Tram.
Tram.